Thanks for joining me, man. I appreciate
man.
it. And Donnie, thank you for setting this up. Appreciate it. So, all right, as we kind of get into this, let's start with a little background, and then I think there's probably 10 different places that we can take this thing. So if you can give everybody a quick background on yourself, what you're doing now, and then let's kind of go over how you got here, if that's cool with you.
Sure, man. Yeah, my background is kind of a local guy here to Fort Myers, Florida. Was born and raised here, and my dad was a pastor as a young guy, and really like loved those things, but also just didn't really like the lifestyle necessarily that came with that, and just saw the sacrifices he made and really our family made to be a part of like what he was doing inside the church. And so I had just decided really early on, probably like 13, 14, I just did not want to be poor. It was essentially kind of a mantra that I made up early on in my life, man. So really early on, I just had a knack for really buying and selling things, and started with really simple things. I pretty much had like a pawn shop inside my home. I would, buy electronics and resell them. I might buy jewelry and resell them. There was a point where I was buying lawnmowers and flipping those, and then it felt like it was just kind of like this small graduation. Then I moved up to cars, and then about 15 years ago, I bought my first property. And that is really what got my sort of feet wet for real estate, and really, man, the first closing on the sales side of that property, I was just like hooked, man.
What was that like?
Well, I mean, at the time it was, I made like $40,000, and first of all, I thought I was rich, I thought I had conquered like financial freedom, and thought I was going to be able to retire in like 2 years. And but yeah, it was exhilarating, and I just thought, man, like if I can do this with one, I know I can do this with more. Mm-hmm. So it just gave me a lot of confidence, and I just felt good about like what I was able to accomplish, and it just gave me the kind of the anger that I needed to like keep doing it more and more. So yeah.
What do you mean the anger that you needed to keep doing it?
Yeah, like the passion, like the fire. Yeah, like I needed like...
You saw there was something to it. Like, all right, I can plug into this. Like I can do something with, basically with my life with something like this.
Yeah, and like a lot of the other things were kind of born out of necessity, right?
Okay.
Like, the flipping lawnmowers. It's just, I don't think I really liked lawnmowers, but there was definitely something about real estate that like I just really loved. And I loved like the character of the homes, and like the stories that they held, and like the legacies that were there. And man, I love old neighborhoods more than I love new neighborhoods. There's so much there, and there's just something in me that's like drawn to that. And so buying that first property and selling it while doing something I really enjoyed was just like something that connected inside of me for sure.
That's cool to find something like that. Well, and how old were you when you like figured that out?
So I was 23 when I bought my first property. And so I'd have been about 25 when I sold that property. And I think I knew pretty early on. Part of the story there is, today they call it house hacking. And house hacking is when you buy like a duplex and you live in one side and you rent the other out.
Okay.
And you can get into a property like that with an FHA mortgage. So you can get in with little money. And oftentimes you can have like your tenant pay your mortgage for you, so you can kind of live rent free. And so today everyone calls that house hacking, and I call what I did the ultimate house hack, because I actually bought the property, and I didn't just rent like one room. I rented all the rooms, and I lived on the couch in the living room. And so I slept on the couch, had a little dresser over in the side of the living room, and and so like I lived, kind of like a college kid in a lot of ways, rented the other. So not only was I paying for my mortgage, but I think I was making like $500 or $600 on top of the mortgage. So not only was I living rent free, I was making income on a house while these guys helped pay my mortgage down and help fund ultimately the rehab that I would use to end up selling the home.
Okay. And so when you said 40,000 on that, was that like profit?
Yeah, so
nice.
So $40,000 profit. Yeah, so when I bought the home, I only had about $8,000 to my name. So I'd saved about $8,000, and at the time the market was really bad, and it was so bad they were actually offering people $8,000 just to get into a home. So if you bought a home, it usually took about 4 to 6 weeks later, they would mail you a check for $8,000. It was called a home buyer tax credit.
Okay.
And so it took me the $8,000 that I already had. It took about all of that to get into the property for down payment and things like this. And then I had to kind of wait. And once I received that $8,000 from the government, I took that money and sort of rolled it into the rehab. And so, you know, I kind of joke, like I was, you know, Facebook Marketplace wasn't really a thing back then, but I was pulling all these like hustles off of Craigslist, man. I remember literally buying a whole house worth of tile for $350. And it was the most hideous tile you probably have ever seen, but it was $350. And so bought this tile, man, and I had no idea how to lay tile, and I started trying to lay it, and yeah, man, made a lot of errors. Yeah, a lot of people would come in and be like, "Who did this work?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, that was me."
Some guy who was here before. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I got the job done, man, and I got it done really, really affordably. And so that $8,000 and really some of the money that was coming in from the rent was how I afforded to pay for.
So that took place over 2 years?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and the reason I waited 2 years is because there's actually a tax code that says if you like live in a property for 2 years, then anytime you sell that property, that you get tax-free gains on that money.
So it's not an investment technically.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah. And so up to $250,000. So for any of your listeners that are listening, you know, obviously consult with your accountant. But, you know, if you're living in a property now and you decide to sell it, you get up to $250,000. And if you're married, it's up to $500,000 tax-free money.
Okay.
And so it's like, where else can you go make that kind of money and make it tax-free? And so I had decided early on that I was going to, at the 2-year mark, sell it and get that money tax-free. So.
Okay. And so that was the first one that you did. Then where did you go after that? What was the progression?
Yeah. So then I just started buying more flips, but I also decided that I did want to own rental properties.
Okay.
And so I took that money and kind of split it into two, used about half the money to buy a rental property, used the other half to buy another flip property. And then, you know, from there, a lot of that just kind of snowballs, man, into more and more and more deals. And, you know, before you know it, you know, probably within a year, I remember having a lunch on a Sunday, and this guy was actually working at a church at the time. And this guy says, "Hey, do you do anything on the side?" And I'm like, "Yeah, actually I do. I flip properties." And I started talking numbers and some of the deals I had. I had really no idea who this guy was or what his financial capacity was, but at the end of the lunch, he looked at me like in the eye and he goes, "Hey man, if you ever need any capital, you know, give me a call." And I was like, what? Like, this guy's going to give me money? And so literally the next day, I think I was too afraid to call. I don't remember, but I remember emailing him and just saying, "Oh, by the way, like, here's the deal I've been looking at. Would you be interested in like being my investor in this?" And man, he agreed. And so, you know, within a couple of years, I started taking on investors and so that's kind of how it blossomed from there. So
those early rental properties, was that stuff that you funded yourself and like found ways to finance it, or was that the first rental property, that guy?
No. So the very first few were ones that I funded myself.
Okay.
And but yeah, like as time went on, I did bring in investors, and there's different ways to do that. You know, one of the ways I would do it would be to, you know, use an investor to help me acquire the property and then refinance out and pay out the investor and just carry like long-term debt on the property. So that's one common way that I'll bring an investor in. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So for an investor in like a case like that, what's the advantage for the investor in that case?
So someone that's going to lend me money?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for them, you've got a guy that has a proven track record that you can like talk to, and you know his character. You can, you know, investigate things. You know, it's like the difference between giving money to me and a financial advisor. A financial advisor is more or less going to be like, "Hey, trust me, you know, like I know what I'm doing." And it's like your money's going to go in probably a lot of things you don't understand, businesses that you probably don't understand. And you're just going like, "Man, I hope this guy knows what he's talking about." Whereas like real estate being a hard asset, most people can understand at least the basic like mechanisms of it. And so it's really kind of easy to grasp. And I just find it to be very safe. So, most often we can get our investors collateralized, which just means we can have some form of protection for them, like their money's tied to the asset. So if things were to go wrong, they would be protected in that event. And so there's a lot of benefits and bonuses for someone like that to invest in someone like local, and someone that they can actually like talk to and knows what they're doing.
So, but in that case though, if like they're going to give you that capital to kind of do the heavy lifting up front, and then you're saying basically you're refinancing so that way you can pay that investor back, and then you own it, but you're taking on like a longer term debt.
Sure.
And then you kind of offset that with the income from the property, I'm assuming. So with that situation, like if they're giving you that money, is that a quick turnaround for them, or are they making like decent interest on that?
Sure.
Like how does that work from their perspective?
Yeah. So most investors don't want to have their money tied up for a long period of time.
Yeah.
So if you tell them, hey, I want to do like a 10-year buy and hold, most people are like, that's too much commitment for me.
Sure.
And so when you tell people, look, like I need a 6-month commitment or 12-month commitment, that's normally what they want. And then oftentimes like they're like, okay, we got through 6 months, we'll do another 6 months. And so the shorter time frame seems to be more appealing to your average investor. But also what happens is not only are they getting interest, which to answer your question is usually somewhere in the realm of like 6 to 12%, depending on, that's a big range, but it really depends on the asset. It depends on, is it amortized? Is it interest only? There's a lot of complexities that can change the interest rate.
So like just from a mental perspective, I almost view it as like, this might be totally off, but almost like a CD with a better investment rate, kind of like, hey, it's 6 months, it's tied up in this, and after that, you'll get 6%.
That's right.
Versus, 3.5% or something.
That's right. And perhaps some more risk than a CD.
Sure.
And so thus a little more upside. But at that point, you're really investing in the operator. So you've got to really know who you're investing in. And then I would want to, if like I was the investor, I would want to have a basic understanding of real estate. So I could kind of look at the deal that's being presented and just go, something seemed off here, or no, that's a fantastic deal. And most people that have the capital to invest have the ability to do that.
Got it.
And so another benefit of like rolling the money over quickly is, oftentimes in these situations, the investor will get some sort of origination sort of fee to bring their money to the table. And let's just say that fee is 1 point. And again, that even ranges, some have no fee, some have 4 points, which would be really high. Well, anytime you roll that money over, that's actually going to grow your annual return, because that point is every time a loan is originated.
Oh, okay. So it would actually be advantageous for them to do like 6 months, 6 months, 6 months.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So like, let's say you lent me $100,000 twice in 1 year. So the point for that is going to be $1,000 twice. Right? So that'd be $2,000 plus whatever interest that you and I would agree on.
Okay.
So there is a small advantage in those situations to turn the money over.
Okay. Got it. All right. So you started off, you're funding those yourself, and then what lessons, all right, what was the experience like of starting to rent properties? Like, were you prepared for it? Was there a bunch of stuff that came up that you had no idea was going to happen? Like what was that process like? Or was it completely smooth sailing? How did it go?
Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to have like educated myself pretty well. And I really trusted the experts, because I just didn't have any experience. And I really didn't have anyone that I had access to that had a ton of experience either. And the few people that I did, I obviously reached out to. So, man, I just followed their feedback. And when they told me, hey, you need, 3 times household income, whatever the rent is, you need 3x that of household income. I was like, okay, well, I guess that's what I need. And so followed that rule. Great rule to have, and I wouldn't have known that had I not, sought that information out. And, another one that they would say is, hey, like, do not rent to anyone who has a previous eviction ever. Don't do it, because you will run into that again with them again. It's only a matter of time.
Okay.
So I just made that a non-negotiable. If you've had a previous eviction, I will not rent to you. And I feel like little things like that, like, really helped like protect me from any absolute craziness.
Yeah.
And no matter how hard you try, no matter how many, things like that you put in place, inevitably you are gonna find a tenant who will trash your property. You'll find a tenant who pays late or doesn't pay at all, and so that stuff does happen. But for the most part, I feel like my landlording experience has been rather tame.
Okay.
So
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I asked that because I was listening to a conversation with Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Poor Dad guy, and I think he was talking with Grant Cardone. I think they're having a conversation back and forth about the different like investment vehicles, and I know they talk about property rental all the time. And one of the criticisms that Kiyosaki had was that Grant Cardone's approach is like very much, hey, invest certain money amounts and then we'll kind of take care of the property management piece. And Kiyosaki's thing was like, hey, if you're going to do it, like do it, learn the basics, experience what it's like to deal with these things, what it's like to have stuff break on you, what it's like to do all those things. Do you think that that's important to have that experience as you scale up and get investors and do all that? Is that ground level stuff important, or does it not really matter?
So I would probably land somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
Which is, I don't know that you need all of the technical knowledge of being a landlord, but I do think it would be really foolish to hand someone money having no basic understanding of real estate and the mechanics of rental real estate specifically.
Yeah.
And I do think you do see a little bit of that with Grant, where it's just like, hey, trust me, give me the money and I'll take care of you. And it's like, maybe that works for him and maybe that works for his investors, but I wouldn't do that. I would not participate in that.
So why not? And this isn't like a bashing him, but it's like, what would your hesitation be there?
My hesitation would be that I think I'm responsible for my money and I need to be accountable for it, and I need to have some level of respect for the money that I've worked really hard to create. And so I'm not just gonna like blindly trust someone and trust that they're gonna like do what's in my best interest. I need to have some level of like accountability, and for me that accountability would just be able to kind of like understand the deal and see what it is, see if the numbers make sense, or just have a sense of like, hey, something's off here, or even I just don't feel good about this.
Yeah.
And if you don't feel good about it, don't invest in it, right? And so, there's a guy that I listen to. He says like, if you don't understand it, don't invest in it. And I just think that's a pretty good, simple philosophy of investing.
Yeah.
And that's why, like for me, like I never engaged too much in the crypto space. Not that people were obviously making lots of money, but there was just like it was like a world I just didn't understand very well, and I just didn't want to engage in like, speculative activity. That's what it would have been for me. It's just speculation, and sometimes it feels like if you're just giving a guy money because, he tells you to, or he's slick or whatever, that seems a bit like speculative behavior, and that would cause me, some alarm. So
well, and it makes you anxious too.
Yeah,
like because it's once you get into that zone when you don't understand it and you're thinking of investing that money, it's like it does feel like gambling. Like it's just the same kind of feeling that you get when you're at like a craps table or something. You're like, all right, sevens. All right, now no sevens.
That's right. Yeah, it does, and it's becomes less about sort of like capital preservation and more about like, I hope this will work.
Here we go.
Yeah, and I just don't think that's a good philosophy for investing. And
when I dove into the crypto stuff, I was finding that a lot, and it's weird because there's almost two sides of that coin. You have the political side, and then you have like the money making side, or three sides, and then there's this practicality, just the blockchain technology, which for me the blockchain technology seems the most interesting. And as I talk to people in especially real estate too, the concept of those NFTs, not for artwork or here's a picture of an ape and it's $8 million or whatever it is, but the fact that you can have all this stuff centralized in a way where you're recording a transaction, as people in real estate have explained it to me, that technology is interesting to me, and like how fast it can be to transfer money and process payments and do all these things. Have you looked into anything on that side of it? for real estate?
Yeah, so I would land exactly where you land
Okay.
in that space, which is like, yeah, the technology is, there's seemingly some future benefit to it. But I don't know that we've even fully realized like what it's capable of or how to even implement it into the space.
Yeah.
And I know there's people that are working at that, but here's a picture of, a house on digitally. And if you pay me this amount of money, you get to stay here a week.
Some of that stuff I think is going to be, I don't know that stuff will land. That's going to be tough. I think things like that will always be there. I'm just wondering if they're going to be processing like contracts and closing documents, like, hey, you're going to electronically sign this and it's going to go on this blockchain and things like that. I think that's where I see it going more towards.
I would agree with that.
But I don't think, I think these kind of
some people were taking like old ideas like timeshares
exactly
and trying to attach like NFT and blockchain to it and trying to pretty it up, and it's just like, bro, that's just another timeshare. Like,
well, and one of the things that alarmed me about some of this stuff with the other kind of coins and stuff was I was talking to a guy, oddly enough, at a funeral or like a celebration of life kind of thing, and he was explaining what he does and how they're making this coin, and we got this like celebrity to back it, and so all the people that are part of it, like, we can't just sell it right away because that would affect the price of it, but we're probably going to sell it in like a month. We kind of all agreed that we're going to sell it in a month because that way in case it drops. And it's like,
it's called a rug pull.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's like, this seems like a rug pull.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how is it not? It's like, well, it's different. I'm like, all right, dude, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and not to back, I'm sure there's some really smart, intelligent business guys who are 19, 20, 21. But when you start seeing like 19-year-olds being like the leading face of like technology, or that would just give me a lot of fear, And so that's kind of what I saw, was just a lot of tech bro type stuff going on. And
you mean it could be like somebody at an exchange that's funneling billions of dollars to other people and stealing the money?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think anything like that would ever happen.
No, ever. Yeah. Never would happen.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I feel safer now that we're having this conversation. But I was just a side note. But yeah, it's interesting how that stuff will come and go. It'll be interesting to see where that technology lands in this whole process.
I agree. It's a lot like the internet, right? Like, there was like this big explosion and everyone was excited and all the money was flying around. And then you had the .com burst, right? And then from that, all of these like amazing, Fortune 500 companies were birthed, like Amazon and eBay and things, PayPal, things like that. So I think the same will happen with blockchain. And so we'll just have to see who emerges.
Yeah. We'll see how it goes. So all right. So you got into those properties and then you started getting into the investment zone, like bringing in investors and things like that. So what were those smaller properties, and then what were the bigger properties that you moved into?
Sure. So, I mean, smaller for us is generally just like a single family home. And, I could give you my pitch on why we like single family as opposed to, multifamily. We like them both, but for different reasons. But one of the reasons we like single family is it's a very liquid asset, meaning that a single family home, there are a lot of buyers for it. Mm-hmm. And so anytime we want to exit that asset, it should be rather easy for us to exit. We might not always get the price we want, but we can exit really quickly.
If you need to get out, there's a plenty big enough market. It's not a foreign concept to people. There doesn't need to be a bunch of people that get together. Somebody can just get a mortgage and buy that.
That's right.
Okay.
Or even cash. I mean, especially in like the sort of the lower end side of things, I mean, there is so much activity that happens in that space that it just would be really easy for us to offload stuff.
Okay.
So really like the idea of that. Like the idea that we can, people tend to treat the single family properties a little better because it feels more like a home to them, and less like a little apartment building where it's just like, I'm kind of just
here
living in the landlord space,
Yeah.
And so generally the tenants will take better care of the property and kind of make it their own, which I really like. So there's reasons we like that. And then, The multifamily space it's really easy to like because of the economies of scale. It's just you're dealing with one insurance policy, you're dealing with one tax bill, you're dealing with one roof, and so the economies of scale just becomes so much easier. And the efficiency of capital too, right? Like if I want to invest $200,000 and I want to use leverage, well, I might have to buy 4 or 5 single family properties.
Yeah.
But I might only buy one multifamily, and I might get very similar returns, but like my effort to buy one versus buy 4 or 5 is going to be a lot less than the one. And in a lot of ways, it's not much different than buying one for one. So it's 4 to 5 times the effort to buy the single family properties.
And so what constitutes a multifamily?
A multifamily technically is 4 units or more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
So, so like you could get an FHA loan on a 4-unit building. Over 4 units, you would not be able to get an FHA loan. So that's one distinguishment. And commercial lenders generally consider 5 units and above when they go to lend. So
got it. Mm-hmm. Man, what is this chemical that they're? Do you smell that?
Not yet.
Okay, good. All right, I'm glad.
I might have COVID. I don't know. I can't smell it.
That's all right. Yeah, they're doing something. They're spraying something. Do you smell that? Yeah, it smells like a nail polish.
Nail polish.
Yeah.
Is there something like?
I have no idea. They're
polishing the floor, man.
They must be doing something out there, polishing the carpets. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you can't smell it. Good.
I'm good, man.
Hell yeah. All right. So, all right. So you've been doing this for a while, and I know that you got 3 and a 5-year-old now. And one of the things we were talking about before we got rolling was you were talking about like self-awareness, self-development, like things along those lines. And you said in the past 2 years that it's been like huge for you. Like it's like transformational. What do you, just curious, like what do you mean by that? And then let's dig into it if you're cool with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So about 2.5 years ago, my life kind of just came like crashing down in a lot of ways. And, there was, I think, a lot leading up to that and leading into that. But it was really overnight that my world just kind of like started falling apart. And I knew really quickly that I needed to get some form of help. And so, yeah, man, as I think I was like so like rejective of that, like this idea that like I needed help, or that like I couldn't fix things on my own, or that like I just felt very self-sufficient, but in a way that like actually was really harmful to me.
Okay. And
so I never asked for help, and I never was needy or like asked people for things. It was just like me. I'll take care of myself, until like I couldn't anymore, really. And so, man, I started seeing like therapists and counselors, and what I realized, man, was that like there was this whole world like kind of going on inside me that like I was like totally unaware of.
What do you mean?
So, I would call it feelings.
Okay.
Yeah, I would call it feelings. Things like fear and like sadness and like anger and joy and gladness. And there were like all of these things like happening inside of me that I didn't know were happening inside of me, because like I had kind of like numbed them all through really addictive behaviors.
Okay.
Whether that was like alcohol or work or anything, like my phone. And so when I was able to kind of like put some of the addictive behaviors to the side and kind of just like be still for a while, what I noticed was like a lot of things just started like coming up inside of me. And that like terrified the hell out of me.
It's scary as shit, dude.
Yeah. Terrified me because like for so long I had been like keeping that stuff down, and I had been doing it so long that I didn't even know I was doing it, and I didn't even know there was anything down there.
Yeah.
And so for 36 years, I've probably been doing that,
Mm-hmm.
And so to like set aside all of that stuff and to like have all this stuff come up, I'm just like, man.
It's rough. Well,
Yeah.
How did you figure out that it was like a kind of an addictive personality? Like, and how did you figure out that it was that, and that was kind of clamping down feelings?
Yeah, I honestly, I have like a lot of embarrassment to say this, but like it was really my wife that had to go like, hey, you got a problem.
Yeah.
You got a problem.
Well, it's usually they're the best ones to tell you. I mean, that's it's, my wife and I, it's like the same thing. Is like she's probably one of the only people that can tell me that she can say it the right thing at the right time, and it feels like she just like stabbed you, and then the next day you're like, shit, you're right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So it came from like a conversation with that.
And she's the only one that saw me at home too, which I think is super important. Like she's the only one that like saw me kind of when my guard was down, you know? And so, yeah, man. So thankful for a wife who was willing to kind of step in and be like, hey, like, I'm not going to allow you to like continue to live like this. And, and I knew I needed help at that point. Like, I think I had reached a point where I knew that I needed some form of help. And so, yeah, man, reached out. Fortunately had some men in my life who were willing to kind of like even just put a plan together for me. That's how bad it had gotten, which was like, I didn't know up from down. I didn't know left from right. And, you know, these men had kind of put together a plan, and I trusted these men. And so I was just like, guys, like, if you telling me this is what will help me, like, I'm going to do it.
Okay.
And, man, I did it. And I kind of attacked this plan, and that plan included things like getting a counselor and getting a therapist and even going away for a week. And they wanted me to go to a ministry at a place called Recovery over at Summit Church here locally. And so there's all these like different things they wanted me to do. And, like the more and more like I started investing in that stuff, the more and more I realized like how far I had kind of gone.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you feel like, did you have to like let go and kind of give in to that process?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we call that surrender, right? Like, all right, I don't know what's best for me. Like I give up. I've been trying what's best for me. You know, what I thought was best for me for, 36 years, that has not worked clearly. And so, yeah, surrendering to, just men who I trusted that I knew had the answers that I needed and was looking for. And so absolutely. And as I sort of kind of continue to help men who were like me, that's probably the biggest obstacle that I see is most men are not willing to do that.
Well, letting go of that is tough because it's counterintuitive, kind of like you said. Like you're like, all right, well, I'm self-sufficient. I'm fine. I got this. I know how this works. And so I don't necessarily need to do that. But then you're stuck. And it's like, hey, man, why can't I get around this? Like, because you're not listening. Like, you're not letting the stuff in that you need to. It's hard for me. I was just talking to the last guy I had on here. His name's Bryce. And we were talking about this exact same thing. It's like, I have a tough time, like, letting it go. Like, surrender.
Yeah.
It's a hard feeling. So, like, how did you, if you don't mind me asking, like, how did you decide to do it? Or was it several small decisions that kind of like compounded? What was that process like for you to figure that out and be willing to go down that path?
Yeah. I mean, I think a couple things. Like one was there was a little bit of relief when my wife kind of called me out. There was almost like, hey, she's throwing me a life raft right now. I'm like, I'm drowning and I want to grab it,
Yep, I do.
So like I was super there. I don't think I needed a lot of like kind of like motivation. And for me, man, like I just cared for my family and my children and myself really.
Yeah.
I think is where I got into enough to where like I don't want to live like this anymore. And so that's like the motivation for me to get me to kind of take the steps that I needed to take in order to kind of find what I have today.
Yeah. Well, and kids will do that too. Like I noticed this as soon as my daughter turned about 3 months was when it really clicked that like I have got a little person and I better get my shit together, because the more that she puts things together, the more that she sees, like she's following my lead. Like she's learning from me all the time. I hear her. She says things that I say. She's always like excited to see me when I come home. I'm like, I'm so thankful that I have that, but also then I'm realizing, okay, well, I got to step up to the plate. Like the days when I'm going to sell stuff and I don't want to make those calls and I'm like dreading it or nervous and all these things, it doesn't matter. Like, I got to get over it. I got to do what I need to do to make money, to provide, to be like the strong person that she needs. And it's crazy motivation how it flipped. Like, did that have a big impact on you, like, for making this choice?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, like, the kids actually, they actually created a lot of pressure for me that I was like unaware of and unwilling to acknowledge.
Yeah.
And so when I had kids, again, this kind of goes back to like not knowing what was going on inside me. I didn't realize like how terrified I was of being a dad.
Were you?
I didn't know, No, I didn't know. I mean, now I look back and I go, oh man, I was like just scared of being a dad, like
it's pretty terrifying.
Yeah, dude. It is. Like, I have to provide for this person, make sure they don't die, like get all this responsibility. And I remember like, and like, again, a lot of embarrassment admitting this, but like around the birth of my children was like, I can look back and see some of my addictive behaviors got like really big.
Really?
Yeah. And what that was like me suppressing like all of this like feelings that I had about this new responsibility that I had, you know?
Well, it's tough because it changes your self-identity, right? Like it forces you to realize like, all right, well, I'm not the same person. I got this responsibility. There is no turning back. And it's a heavy load to take on.
That's right.
And it's like kind of like it's interesting because if you had the easy path and you took it, I know you're saying like you feel embarrassed about it, but at the same time, you course corrected. And one of the kind of valuable things that I've learned from the times that I've made mistakes and gone down the wrong path is like when you course correct and you get back on the right path, it's like, oh, I know what's on the other side of that. And like, I don't want to be there anymore. So I at least know what's waiting there. And it's like, it's not that great. Let me go this path that I want to go. So I think one of the things that always tripped me up growing up was feeling like I wanted to know like what was on the other side of that. But every time I like fuck up and then you find out, you're like, I don't want to be here at all.
Yeah, man.
That's kind of, although it sucks, the lessons are always applicable and they always move forward with you.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
And today I have all the tools I need to like face things like that. Right.
Yeah.
And now like if I was to have another child, I would just come in here and tell you, dude, like, I'm scared, man.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, like, having a third one, I mean, 2's okay, but 3's makes me nervous. Like, I would just be able to talk about that stuff and just be, like, able to express it. And
I'm already tired.
Yeah, man. Yeah. But, like, 2.5 years ago, I didn't have those tools. Like, I didn't even know what was going on in here.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, had the, like, language or ability to discuss it.
What was your inner voice like? So I'll give you my example. So maybe this helps ask a question. I don't know how to ask it, but like my inner voice used to be, and still is, but I control it now. It's like, you don't deserve this. Like you didn't get that, or like, you messed up. Like you did. It was all like negative. And I always thought like, all right, that's probably good. I'm from Long Island, so it's like everybody's kind of an asshole up there, and everybody's like will say that to other people, but I always thought that's how you do things. Like that's kind of what it is to be a man, and like go through these things. You just deal with it, and like, hey, you're being a little bitch. Stop it. Like, okay. Sometimes you need to tell yourself that. I still do, but like that was the main method of talking to myself, and it didn't click until maybe 2.5 years ago. I was reading this book or listening to a podcast of a guy who teaches or trains like the highest level athletes, right? Like, takes like number 3 or 4 tennis players and helps them get to number 1. And he's like, the consistent thing that they all have is they have terrible self-talk. So they can be the best and do all this stuff, and they can't get past number 3. And the linchpin is always like, well, how do you talk to yourself? Well, I won and then I beat myself up, or I lost and then I beat myself up. There was no like, you're always the punching bag. What was your inner voice like? Did you have that, or was it not even present?
Yeah. So I did have it, and for me it sounded a lot like do more and try harder.
Like no matter what.
Yeah, like dude, I could have worked like a 90-hour week, and at the end of the week it'd have been like, dude, you got to do more and you got to try harder. And it was just, bro, it's like the cul-de-sac of stupidity, man. It's just like the spiral of death. And there, again, like, you know, to use your example, you know, I could have won a tennis match, and at the end, my voice would have said, bro, you got to do more. You got to try harder. You beat him by 5. You should have beat him by 6. You should have beat him by 7. And so yeah, man. And again, that inner voice looks a lot different today. But the sad thing about our inner voice, something I've learned, is that inner voice is always given to us. Like, you didn't come up with that voice on your own. Like, you learned that voice from somewhere. And so, like, being able to, like, understand that, like, that is not necessarily my inner voice. That's like a voice that someone gave to me. And being able to do the work around that and kind of undo some of what was done will allow you to actually have your voice. And your voice can be whatever you want it to be, you know?
100%.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's been interesting I started doing like mindset stuff in the past year or so, 6 months really.
Okay.
And yeah, that was a big factor that I had to flip, was like, hey, you've got all this stuff in here that you tell yourself, and that sets what you do. Like, that sets where you can reach, what your goals are, all these things. You have these things in here that you've just kind of agreed to, and that's why you're where you're at now. And it's, hey, take a step back, figure out what you want, tell yourself that you can do it, and figure out the ways to get there. And then suddenly it starts changing, and you start moving towards it, and the things that stop you before aren't as big of a roadblock, because you're like, no, this is fine. I can accomplish this. I can do all these things. I don't know. It's just the way that you said that was interesting, because I didn't necessarily put that there, but you do have the ability to change it.
You do.
So, like, how do you, when you're talking to younger guys, I'm sure it's usually younger guys that kind of going through similar things that you were going through, like, how do you work with them to get them to see stuff like that? Like, how do you help them, like, come to that realization?
Yeah. You know, one thing the disclaimer I would put is, like, I can't do anyone's work for them, right? You know, and this idea that, like, I could maybe be the shaman or fix them, or it doesn't work that way. But what I can offer and what I can do is probably what is my number one goal today is what I would just call presence, which means, like, the best thing I can do is be as present as possible right now with you, right?
Yeah.
As we have this interview. And the more present I am, it means, like, the more curious I'm going to be about you and about this time. And there's something about that presence that is typically, like, very invigorating. And actually what I would say is, the presence really draws a line in the sand. So what you're going to find is, the more present you are, the more there are a party of people who are going to kind of, like, be drawn to you. But there is another party of people who do not like it. They prefer the lifestyle of being sort of what I would just call numbed out all the time. They don't want to go anywhere with you. They just kind of want you to just be a character in their story, and they want you to just kind of show up and be numb to them and everything around them. And so what presence does is it kind of draws a line in the sand and says, which side do you want to be on? Do you like this or do you not? And it's been really interesting, and it's sad in a lot of ways over the last 2.5 years as I've gotten more presence to kind of see, like, my relationships, like, half of them kind of, like, moving close, and the other half be like, nah, I don't think we want to do that. And so what I offer is really that. And so I'll just sit with men and just, you know, ask them and be curious about them and their stories and where they've come from and their hurts and their habits and their hang-ups. And, like, the more I can offer that, the more curiosity I can give them, the more likely they are going to be curious about themselves. And that curiosity about yourself will be what will lead you to do the work you need to do.
That's true. So when you're talking to these guys, like, are there any common themes that you're hearing from either the way they look at themselves or the way they talk to themselves? Like, what are you hearing when you're talking to them?
Yeah, the common theme is almost always childhood trauma.
Okay.
Almost always. Not exclusively, but I'd say 90%. And so really digging in around, like, what it was like to be a kid in their house, or, you know, what it was like to be an athlete in their family, or, you know, you name it.
Sure.
And kind of asking a lot of questions about that. And what you'll find is there's some people that they do not want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a clue.
Sure.
That's a clue. That's a vault that's been locked down that probably needs to be broken into at some point. And I'm no therapist. I'm no that's not my job, but just giving people the curiosity is what they need. But that's a theme that I would say exists in almost all of the men that I sit with. Really? And it doesn't have to be big, man. There's what we call big T traumas and little T traumas. Big T traumas would be the things you would expect, like, maybe they were sexually abused or physically abused, or those are big T. I mean, those are like obvious, cases of men who turn to, addictive behaviors. But the little T traumas are just as significant. And we say it's like death by 1,000 paper cuts, which it's like, dude, like,
yeah.
Maybe you were bullied a lot, in school, or maybe, we see this a lot with like childhood, like maybe you were the middle child and, like the oldest got a lot of attention and the youngest got a lot of attention. You just kind of got forgotten. Maybe your voice just was never heard, and like you had things you wanted to say, but you never could say it because the oldest and the youngest were always like black. And so it can even be like little things like that. But what happens a lot is like, it takes a lot of curiosity and courage just to get to like that.
Yeah.
Because they don't even totally know it yet.
Well, and it's scary when those things come up because your first reaction is like, I don't want to think about this. Like, what is this? What is this? All right. Nope. Like, gonna repress this.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's interesting when I'll talk to you about the details of this after, but
sure.
Like gone through some processes that kind of forced me to address some of those like subconscious things. I didn't have any in the grand scheme of things. It's all little T trauma in this case. Nothing major. All good, thankfully. But went through some stuff that made me address those subconscious things, and like it presents to you, and you have to think about it, and it sucks because it's like you're going through. It's like it's the same thing with all the biblical stuff, or you listen to like any of this ancient stuff where they talk about walking through a desert, or you're in this dark place, or like King Arthur, the way they figured out where to go was go to the darkest part of the woods. Like that kind of stuff is, if you can go into that darkness and just like deal with it and know you're gonna get your ass kicked, but like you can sit with it and deal with it, maybe come back out and go back in and like keep working on it. Like that's where, I don't know, it's always for me like the biggest transformation takes place.
Yeah, man, I agree. And I think what's sad about people that struggle with particularly addiction is it's really, really misunderstood. And I even misunderstood it, and up until a couple years ago. But really, all addiction is it's a self-soothing mechanism. And when you see someone who has an addiction, it is someone who literally all they're trying to do is take care of themselves. They're just trying to tend to themselves. And most often what has happened is they have not been trained or taught or given the tools or resources to learn how to do that in an appropriate, healthy way.
Okay.
And so what addiction is almost always tending to some wound that they've had that they've not been able to care for themselves or have others care for them in an appropriate way. And so when you view addiction through this lens, you tend to have a lot more sympathy and empathy for the people who do struggle with addiction. Yeah. And so for me, that was such a relief as I was going through some of my addictive behaviors to like understand that like, man, like the guy, my counselor told me, Brit, you're just trying to take care of yourself, dude. That's all you were doing, man.
Yeah, you're not evil. You're not hating. I don't hate myself.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah. It's like, all right, this is actually in the context of things when you break it down, this actually makes sense. Like this is something that somebody would do. I just found this vehicle to be able to do it. That's
right.
what I stuck with.
That's right.
I happened to pick a not healthy one.
That's
but
right.
like it's the same. I was applying the principle. I just used the wrong tool. Kinda.
And generally speaking, the stronger the addiction, the more aggressive, or maybe the bigger the drug, let's say it that way, usually the deeper the wound. And so they need a stronger soothing mechanism to like kind of tend to the pain that they've felt. And it's really sad, man, because I've met a lot of addicts over the last couple of years, and some of these people are like the kindest, gentlest, gracious people that I've ever met. And I just feel so sad for some of them because they just have not gotten the care that they need, and really deserve, just like any of us deserve. So yeah, man, there's like a special place in my heart for those people. And really I'm one of them in a lot of ways. So, yeah.
What's it been like to kind of move into where you're at now? Like, I know that you followed the path and you're following the plans they were doing, but like, what's that transformation been like?
Yeah. So addiction, it's something that helps you until it kills you, right? That's the dichotomy there. But so, for me, work was one of my many addictions. It was my way of escaping the world, right? And so, the way that I like to say it is that, like, I was willing to let everything live except myself. I was going to be the thing that died, right? So
okay.
Like my business couldn't suffer, my relationships couldn't suffer, like everything, like I was going to be the thing that died, right? And that's like a really shitty way to live.
Yeah, and it's weird because it's like cloaked in like an altruism.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. It is a nobilistic kind of like, yeah. And so what I have, like, the transition for me has just been sort of literally the opposite, which is like, there is nothing in this world outside of my wife and my children and maybe some friends that is worth killing myself over.
Yeah.
There's nothing. And so, like, today I have decisions to make every day. Is my business going to suffer a little bit, or am I going to suffer a little bit? And today that decision's easy. My business will suffer a little bit today. Like, that extra hour I'm going to give to myself, not my business. Is my family going to suffer today, or is, this other relationship going to suffer today? Well, this other relationship's going to suffer because my family matters more to me.
Well, it comes back to the presence too, because
right.
when you have that sense of presence and you look at those decisions, it actually becomes a lot easier. And that's been something since I had my daughter, that those decisions have become easier. It's like, hey, unless it's those like, once every few months, like, hey, I'm going to go to a concert or something, take care of the baby for tonight, like, go do that. But other than that, it's very much like, hey, I want to be there. I want to be present. I want to have these memories. I want to have that time spent with her. It's like, if I can be present, that makes every decision so much easier.
That's right.
And presence has been a big factor too.
Yeah. Yeah, and just not allowing myself to die on the hill of really anything that's not significant in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
And I was just willing to die for way too many things, namely my business. And, I think I've shared this on another podcast, but like this year is like one of the first years that, one of my businesses, like, we're down in revenue, right? And like historically, like my move would have been to, like, my inner voice, work more, try harder, do better. And it would have been like, I know that I would literally be dying right now.
Yeah.
My numbers would probably be where they need to be, but I would be like really suffering. And like, that's not the case. My business is suffering a little bit, but like, who's okay is like me.
Yeah.
I'm okay.
Family's okay.
And exactly.
Yeah.
That's a great point. My family's okay. The things that really matter are okay. And so like just the perspective of that, just flipping that script, and realizing that I matter, and that I'm not going to let myself die for things that don't. So
yeah. Well, and do you, like, flipping that script, do you also feel like that has a part to do with that faith piece, that letting go, and like realizing like, hey, it might be suffering now, but in the past you go, I have ultimate control over this. I have to take care of this right now.
Sure.
And if I don't do something about it, it's going to die and it's going to be terrible. All these things will happen. Like, do you feel like now, okay, this is just a season that this is going to suffer, and when I have either you can decide, hey, I don't actually care about this anymore, I'm going to sell it or do something else,
right.
Or like, hey, this is a season where I need to put my efforts elsewhere. I'll keep this I'll tend to it.
Sure.
And then 6 months from now, 3 months, 12 months, like, I can revisit this with fresh perspective and everything will be okay. Like, is that part of what the shift has happened? Like, has that time horizon gotten longer? Like, everything's not on fire. I don't need to work 92 hours instead of 90 hours to make it happen. Like,
yeah.
is that part of it? Like, or am I kind of off base of that?
No, I think you're onto something there. I mean, I think the surrender piece is so huge, which is I'm not going to try to like flex my way through anything. I'm not going to try to will and just like willpower. And that's not to say like having like a strong will and having a solid backbone. Like that's not what this is about. This is to say like I have those things. Like, I'd like to think I do. This is to say that like I'm going to surrender to the process and the outcome. And I am going to realize that I matter more than my business matters. And the reality is that my motivation is still the same. My motivation in my addictive behaviors was really to take care of myself. That's all it was. I just wanted to take care of myself.
And now you're replacing the method of doing it.
Now I still want to take care of myself. But it just looks literally the opposite, right? And so today, taking care of myself looks like boundaries, and it looks like restrictions around my time and who gets access to me and who doesn't. Like all these little things create like a protection sort of moat around me that says like I'm not going to allow that to harm me. You know?
Well, it's interesting too because like you said, like I'm going to let myself suffer and not let these other things suffer, and you basically make yourself like a second-class citizen in the own story of your own life.
That's right.
And it is interesting how when you flip it, actually the relationships get better. Like you said, like it pushes those people away, and then it brings these people closer. It's strange how that selectiveness and finding those people that actually like add to your life, even though it may be a lot less people.
That's right.
And not the people that you thought that it would be either. It is cool to see how those people start like enriching your life, and you find a sense of belonging. I don't know.
That's right.
Like I'm noticing that lately.
I would say like this, like everything gets way better. My life is way better today than it was 2.5 years ago. But it, in some ways, gets a lot harder.
I was just gonna say, do you feel like it got harder?
It got harder, and I will use one emotion, but I will say now I have a lot more feelings about everything. But I'm gonna use one primary one, which is to say, it got a lot scarier. Like life today for me is scarier than it was 2.5 years ago.
Why scarier?
So, you know, if my business suffered, right? And I wanted to exert my control. My control really is me not wanting to feel my fear.
So I am going to exercise my control, and I'm not worried about what will happen with it because I've got it. I'm just going to work an extra 5 hours this week, make sure that's taken care of, no problem. Versus
fear that's not felt and processed properly moves to anxiety and then moves to control.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Well said. Okay. That is the process.
That's right.
Okay.
So I'm anxious and then I exert my control. Anxiety, I think we'd all agree, anxiety, control, not good things usually. Okay.
Yep.
And so now what I have to do is I have to surrender, and I have to just go, I'm pretty nervous about that. That is like kind of scary. It is scary to me that my numbers are down. Might not be scary to you, might not be scary to anyone else that looks at my P&L, but when I look at it, I'm like, that is a little scary.
Yeah.
But instead of like moving to anxiety and control, now I can come on a podcast and tell you, hey man, that's like pretty scary.
Yeah.
And I can actually just feel it and surrender to the feeling, surrender to the outcome, surrender to the process, and not have to exert my control or feel anxiety. And I can tell you this, I'd rather feel fear than anxiety.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, and two, one of the things that's interesting about it is because you're scared, but you're processing it, you get to live in reality. So you do get to see all the options that are open to you. And one of the things I noticed about anxiety is that it does close those options. So you kind of go for a path of least resistance. And that's where you can start to get back into those like addictive zones, whatever it might be, or even just like addictive thoughts of rather than me cold call this guy and have him potentially hang up in my face, say, fuck you, don't call me again, which to me is like devastating. But I start thinking, well, everybody's going to be pissed that I called. Why would I even call these people? I shouldn't call anybody. I'm probably bothering. If I call this one guy, I know that there's literally 20,000 prospects out there that
Yeah.
I could sell to, and I could probably spend the rest of my adult life calling and never call all these people. But if that one guy hangs up and he's pissed, that could be the end of it. And like you start getting these like loop patterns,
That's
and you
right.
don't live in reality where I can just go, I'm afraid to call this guy.
Yeah.
Let me do it. This first one's going to suck. I'm going
Yeah.
to get my teeth kicked in, and then I'll just call another person. And then you start to move through. And then when you're afraid, you're still listening. You're still present. I can hear what somebody says. Hey, no, we're good. Hey, man, understood. But a lot of people are saying they're good. They're using spreadsheets, all this stuff. Like, you're not dealing with that, are you? It's like, oh, kind of. Like, all right, well, can you tell me? Like, all right, sure. And it's just like, if you're present in that
Yeah.
moment, you can do that. But if I decided they hate me and I'm really anxious, I'm really sorry I called, hang up.
Yeah.
Like, you don't see the field that's ahead of you. You're
That's
just
right.
like this. You're like with blinders on.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's how it happens for me.
You said it really well, man. Like this process for me is really me being present to reality. Mm-hmm. And anything other than feeling my feelings is my attempt to escape reality. Addiction is my attempt to escape reality. Anxiety and control are my attempt to escape reality. Demanding people are their attempt to like avoid their sadness. Isolation is your attempt to avoid your loneliness. Like there's all of these like subscripts of our feelings that we'll move to in order to just avoid them altogether. But the reality is our life is very scary. It can be very lonely. It can be very sad. All right. It can be you can have gladness and joy, but there's like all this range. And like, if you want to live life fully, you're going to have to feel all of it. Mm-hmm. You have to, or you're going to do what you said, which is try to escape reality.
Well, do you feel like going through this process has helped with your business stuff too?
Yeah, it absolutely has. And primarily in my ability to lead others,
Okay.
And relate to others.
So what's the impact it's had on leadership?
So leadership really is now because I understand me, I can now understand others a little better.
Okay.
So now when I see anxiety or control in someone, I can actually know that they're just afraid.
Mm-hmm.
They're not.
It's like okay, this person's got an insecurity. They're not evil. They're not out to get me.
Yeah. And so it really kind of like helps me get back to like the core of what's really going on. And so like, early on in my career, when someone was like really controlling, that made me like, made me really nervous, right? It's like, oh my gosh, are they trying to control me? And are they going to try to control the contract? But like now when I see control, I know he or she's afraid. And so now what I can do is I can be curious about what they're afraid of. And sometimes they won't tell you.
Sure.
But like when you see it, you can be like, hey, are you nervous about anything? Or, is there anything about this that's making you nervous or scared? And a lot of times they'll be like, actually, yeah. And so being able to like see sort of like the character defects in people and understand what's underneath that can help me get to the bottom of like what's really going on.
It's real empathy.
Yeah. Being able to see people for like where they're at.
Well, and you can call people on it too when the time is right. I think that's one thing that I was always afraid of with being in a leadership spot was like that. It is actually a responsibility that you have to call people on stuff, and you do have to understand where they're coming from, because bad management a lot of times does come from they don't know what's going on. They're afraid themselves. They're worried that they're going to look bad or all these kind of things. So it is like an insecurity thing. I feel like a lot of issues would get solved if people started to try to figure themselves out. But it's easier said than done.
It is, man.
And it's a process too. I don't have it all figured out.
And a lot of people, they don't want to.
No.
And a lot of people, as me, for 36 years, I didn't want to. I didn't think I needed to.
But it's cool that you went through that, because you also can understand the flip side of not wanting to.
Yeah.
You know? And like you said, you can't do the work for people.
That's right.
But it does give you that empathy to know, like, hey, not like, snap out of it.
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
Hey, I know where you're at, or at least I kind of know where you're at.
That's
like,
right.
When you're ready.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not everyone has the same language I have. So not everyone can say like, hey, I'm lonely, I'm afraid or whatever. But I get I get the gist, and I can use words they understand or they're willing to say. So I'll use the word nervous instead of afraid. And so, yeah, man, it's helped me tremendously be able to connect with people. And really what I've learned too is that emotion is how we connect, really. And so like when I'm willing to share like my emotion with someone, that is like the best way for them to kind of attach to me.
That's a good point. And that goes back to your point of people who you push away versus who you pull in.
Yeah.
And I think it does take, you do have to kind of hit a certain point in life where you're comfortable enough with who you are to draw that line in the sand.
Yeah.
It's like, come closer.
That's right.
Sorry, but I'm not for you.
That's right. And my feelings aren't for everyone, right? They're only for people I want to give them to, and I can have boundaries around that. But, there are going to be some people who listen to this, and I'm going to say things like, I'm afraid about this, and they're going to go, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
What that is connection.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you connect. Or I'll say things like, man, I was lonely, and somebody's like, me too.
Yeah.
And as soon as that kind of stuff happens, that's when you get real like human connection.
It's cool.
And without it, it becomes everything super transactional. Everything's like, you give me this, I'll give you that. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And so our relationships just become, people are just kind of pawns in our game, and it's really no way to live. It's a very lonely way to live.
Transactional is a good word, and I just realized something when you said that. When I feel like I'm doing things more transactionally and more of my relationships are starting to be transactional, that actually correlates highly with the times that I'm least happy with what I'm doing. There's no connection. Like today, I feel like I'm on fire, like in terms of like leading up to this and cold calls and stuff. And when I'm talking to people, I'm just like connecting. But there's days where you're just like, man, I feel like I might as well be like an ATM calling someone. Like, I know it's a stupid example, but
no, man.
Yeah.
And people, most people can sense it.
Yeah. And it leaves people with a weird taste.
Yeah, man.
Well, dude, thank you for coming and doing
course,
this. This was
man.
really cool.
Yeah.
I'm glad.
I love how the second half of this went. It was really good.
Yeah, this is super cool. I'm glad we got connected. And I guess before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to leave people with?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. If people want to find me, and if they they're not going to find a lot of online stuff about feelings from me, but happy to chat about that if you want to chat about that. But most of my stuff online is about real estate, buying businesses, and you can find me on, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, all the big ones, Twitter, and would love to connect with you on those spaces and have conversations.
Sweet. Thanks for doing this, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Thanks, man.